This episode of Back to the Roots podcast is brought to you by Byron Seeds. The folks at Byron Seeds believe organic requires a different perspective, plan, and approach. Organic isn't simply a different type of product or even a different way of farming. It's a different way of thinking, planning, commitment. It's a different philosophy on how to feed the world. Many won't understand, but the people at Byron Seeds do. We're owned by organic dairy farmers. We not only have the product, but we plan, manage, and execute organic. We speak your language, we share your struggles, and we laud your successes. Organic isn't a way of doing business, it's a community. We learn from each other. We're in this together. We'd be glad to talk cropping plans, management systems, the road to profitability. We understand what you're trying to do. We're farmers just like you. Visit us at byronseeds.net or give us a call at 800-801-3596. And thanks to Byron Seeds.
You're listening to Back to the Roots podcast. I'm Mike Klein, and along with Brian Wood today, we are joined by Robin Brekken. He's an organic crop farmer from Crookston, Minnesota. Robin, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here.
So I want a little bit of a background of your farming operation and kind of where you're located and where Crookston, Minnesota is.
Okay. Crookston is in the Red River Valley, which runs between the border of Minnesota and North Dakota. Crookston is 90 miles south of the Canadian border, so we're up way in the northwest corner of Minnesota. And good farmland. It's actually back in the glacier days. It's lake bottom, actually. So if you ever Google the Great Lake Agassiz, you'll see a picture of my farm. Basically was at one time under a whole bunch of water, and it covered a large area.
How many acres do you farm?
When we started our transition in 1998, we were farming about 3,300 acres, and today we're probably around 2,800. And the reason for that is there's just some land that is not meant to be farmed organically. Too many hard lessons, too many pot knobs on the head, and you eventually just need to let it go.
Mm-hmm. What made you decide to transition to organics?
First was scales of economy. Everything keeps getting more and more expensive. Equipment keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you need to spread it over more acres to make everything make sense. I didn't want to do that because I hated spraying. I hated chemicals. I really hated getting up every day wondering what I had to kill next. And then I thought, all right, so if what I'm doing is so great, why is there always something wrong? And if I hated it, I didn't see a lot of sense in doubling what I did, being I hated it. So I was looking for a way just to leave the farm the same size, which it's been since I've been in high school, which is 40 years ago. And there's not too many farms that can say that because everybody's in expansion mode. So I looked at organic as possibly being a way to maintain farm size, and that's worked, and actually the farm has shrunk a little bit. So I told my wife, we got married in 1996, started my transition the summer of 1998, told her what I wanted to do, spent a couple days crying on and off because she just couldn't figure out why I wanted to do that, because we had a good life. And I said, yeah, we got a good life that I can't stand. So after a couple days, she goes, well, are you sure? And I said, are you ever sure? So she agreed. It's okay. Well, if that's what you think we should do, I'm okay. And I said, and there's one last thing you need to know. She goes, what's that? I said, we could lose everything. And she goes, and you're okay with that? And I go, no, but I'm just telling you it could happen. And she goes, so what if that happens? And I said, then I guess we're supposed to do something else. But we're still here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, big leap of faith. Didn't really know anything about what was to come, but I knew what I wanted to get away from. So that began the journey of our transition to organic.
When you did that, you went whole hog.
Yep. And a lot of people said, so did you do it a piece at a time? I said, no, I did the whole thing. And like, wow, are you nuts? And I go, probably.
And you had no animals on the farm?
No animals. We had animals back in 1974, and that's when our farm got big into sugar beet production.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were in the beets, we should have been making hay. If we were making hay, we should have been in the sugar beets. So we did 1 year of that, then the cows went away. So we had a Hereford cow-calf operation. We had about 150 head.
Okay. So without animals, you go whole hog on 2,800 or 3,800.
3,300 acres.
3,300 acres. Where do you even start?
Well, so again, I dive into this, start going to seminars and trying to get educated on, what needs to happen here. And so then you'd run into dairy farmers and they tell their story. And I farm 180 acres, put 5 kids through college, and life's good, never really had a need for anything. And another one, we farmed 240 acres and put 7 kids through college. And I'm thinking, what am I missing? They have a fraction of the acres I do. And I'm just like, wow. But of course they had animals. So the loop was closed. I didn't have that, nor was I in a position to have that. So we had to kind of look at it from a different approach. And they just, in disbelief, they said, how do you manage that? And I said, I don't. I said, it manages me.
Mm-hmm.
Did you start with a variety of crops in your rotation, or did you just start with all hay, or what kind of crops were you doing?
So here's the mistake I made. So we didn't start our transition with alfalfa. So alfalfa came big in our operation when I figured out I can't kill thistle with steel. There's no tillage that's going to eradicate this problem. So all you do with a chisel plow or something to that effect in a thistle is make it mad, and it comes back with a vengeance.
And all his buddies.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where alfalfa kind of came into the picture, and literally chasing the worst fields of thistle around the farm got put into alfalfa. Then through the repetitive cutting, those plants use up their root reserves and they disappear, and life's pretty good. So after a few years, you couldn't tell if my alfalfa was organic or conventional, or to clean things up nice. And it really set up our rotation very nicely. So I guess from one of my battle scars for someone who's entertaining transitioning to organic, I would strongly encourage start with forage, because good hay always sells. It doesn't matter if it's conventional, organic, biological, sustainable, call it what you want. Good hay always sells.
Mm-hmm. And then did you slowly shift into mostly hay production?
We peaked out, I'm guessing probably 7 or 8 years after we got into hay. Half our farm was in forage production. And that was too much. And too much just because the length of the haymaking period was too long. I mean, we got up to 11, 12 days, and where I live, you just can't trust the weather that long. So I've had 3 hay fires in my lifetime. After the third one, and the hay was all dry, 11 to 13% under a tarp. And, did they self-combust? Were they lit? It's hard to say. So after the third fire, I just snapped, and I said, and we had the wrappers. So we're going to wrap every bale we make. Well, that kind of changed a lot of things, and I didn't realize the stress that would relieve. So when we made that decision, we were probably at 1,200 acres of hay, and then we were shooting for 20 to 25% moisture. Keeps everything softer. It's more palatable. A lot of times it smelled like it fermented, but it didn't. It was green as grass. So once we did that, our baling window went from 4 to 6 hours a day, from 3 to 4 hours a day. We actually let a baler go. We had the same amount of acres.
Oh, wow.
But our daily baling window was much larger, and we just didn't need that many balers to accomplish the same task, because dry hay mean, everything's got to be under 15%. So you start baling, all of a sudden you find an 18, you hyperventilate, can't shut stuff off fast enough, and then you wonder what to do with these bales because they're could be hot. And then when we decided to wrap every bale, so you check the hay and you got a 19 and a 23 and a 21 and a 18 and go. Didn't matter because we were going to wrap everything. And then in the wintertime, you can't get trucks to tarp, or they don't want to. So they either don't want to tarp, or you got to pay them to tarp, or their tarps are froze like a little turd. So again, wrapping everything took care of that, took care of bottom bales, and the amount of stress just dropped. So typically, assuming decent weather, we would cut Monday, bale Wednesday, versus cutting Monday, baling Thursday or Friday. Mm-hmm. So it just got really efficient, and so it just worked very well for us.
What kind of rotation? Half your ground is in hay at one point. What kind of rotation are you doing? How long are you keeping it in hay?
So typically we would leave it in for 4 years. The longest we ever went was 7. And, everybody thinks, oh, geez, after 3 years, the alfalfa's getting tired and blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't know if it's getting tired as much as it's getting malnourished. Mm-hmm. So if you want to put the money into your hay crop or your forage crop, I think you can leave it there as long as you want. But there again, I think there's organic by intent and there's organic by neglect. And intent costs money. Neglect does not, but then you kind of get what you put into it. And we weren't afraid to put money into our hay crop. The highest RFQ we ever produced on our farm was 306. And there's a lot of people that don't think the chart goes that high, but it does. Mm-hmm. And again, that takes money, and that was in a time where milk prices were high and life was good for everybody all the way around. Everybody was making money. Well, then I don't need to bring anybody up to speed what happened to milk prices, so they start to decline, which means the dairyman can't afford to pay the price for that kind of hay, which means I can't afford to buy the inputs to raise that kind of hay. So it's kind of a domino effect. But, we certainly weren't afraid to pour the coals to it, and the quality showed that. But that was a time when, the dairyman could afford to buy that kind of forage. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that ship's kind of sailed for now.
Mm-hmm. So when you say pour the coals to it, so what was your agronomy plan for your alfalfa? And did it vary from, new seeding to 5th year? Did it vary through those years, or was it kind of the same plan every year?
Once we got the crop established, it kind of stayed the same. But again, I mentioned earlier, we're in a big sugar beet production area, and we had 1,100 acres of sugar beets in our rotation, and kind of come full circle back to my forage days and learned that you want to maximize sugar production in any crop. I don't care what it is, because sugar production in the plant is a sign of plant health. And interestingly enough, you need soluble calcium and soluble phosphorus in order to drive sugar production. And again, the interesting thing about that is the 2 minerals that weeds hate the most: soluble calcium, soluble phosphorus. So when you start to think about how all this was designed by our creator, it's like, well, isn't it cool that those 2 minerals do the same thing and it's good on both counts? So the other reason you want to drive sugar production is vegetative eating insects don't have a pancreas, so they can't digest complex sugars and carbohydrates like we can. So I fielded a lot of calls over the years about, what do you do with the bugs in your hay and how do you deal with that? And I said, I don't have bugs. What do you mean? So I'd tell them that, and they said, we typically use sugar in our foliar sprays. Oh, that's how you get the sugar so high in your hay. And I'm like, no, you need the soluble forms of calcium and the soluble forms of phosphorus. The sugar, because we also did a biological extract as well. So the sugar was a food source for the biology, because you don't want to take all this biology to the field without a food source. So the sugar was a food source for them. And that was kind of the main ingredient. So soluble calcium, soluble phosphorus, sugar, and a microbial package. So try and get some very diverse biology out to the field. And yeah, it worked very well.
And are you foliar feeding that, or how are you? Is there a dry source?
We foliar fed after every cutting.
After every cutting.
And again, intent, money, dollars, and yeah, it's not cheap. So again, you kind of need to gauge, and it starts with the price of milk. And obviously you need the dairy producers to be able to afford what you're producing. And again, unfortunately, that has eroded over time. So, and you can have all the ego you want, but if you're going to produce 250, 260, or even 300 relative feed quality hay, who can afford that? And, if you want to make it, that's fine, but you're not going to make any money. Because on the other end, people just can't afford it.
So does your foliar applications, do you cut those back a little bit because you're not looking for that 300 RFQ hay?
Yeah, we backed off on the amount. The ingredients were the same. We just backed off on the quantity that we put on. And we always use plenty of water. We always use 20 gallons of water. And okay, you say that to a conventional guy, what, are you nuts? All you do is all water. Oh, whatever. It is what it is. And we were more than willing to do what it took to raise that kind of forage. And again, you need some cooperation from the weather as well. And, if it's dry like it is now, I mean, it's a completely different ballgame because you need moisture to get to some of the stuff to solubilize and have uptake from the plant. And we're in my life, I'm 60 years old. I've never seen it this dry where I live, ever.
Really? Like, has it been dry all year?
Yeah, so the fall of 2019, we were starting to wonder if it would ever quit raining. And we got the crop planted in 20 and rain again. Just unbelievable. And that probably quit in mid-July. And it really didn't rain the rest of the year. And we had very limited snow. And when the snow melted, which is probably early March, we've had 1.8 inches of rain on my farm. Today being August 10th, give or take. So it's very dry. And our soil is very heavy, so it has the capacity to hold on to water. But, yeah, the crops are really, really struggling.
And you don't have any irrigation there?
We do not.
So is there any crop that'll produce 1.8 inches of rain for a growing season?
Well, so we had some spring wheat and some oats. The wheat was appraised at 2.5 bushels. The oats was appraised at 5. So we immediately hayed that. So again, a sign of how dry it is. We got 1.5 tons of hay off our wheat and oats per acre. We've done 2 cuttings of hay, and we're not going to touch 1.5 tons on 2 cuttings of hay.
Wow.
And there won't be a third cutting. So it's anywhere from maybe 4 to 5 inches tall to dormant.
How's the corn?
The corn, I think, is going to make corn, which is surprising. I'm not saying it's going to make a lot of corn, but there'll probably be areas where there's 50, 60 bushel corn and probably areas where there's nothing.
And how widespread is the drought there?
It's pretty common up in northwest Minnesota, and it goes all the way west out into Montana, and then from there out to Washington, Oregon. I mean, it's a pretty big area up into Canada. Yeah, it's a big area.
Because I did hear that like southern Saskatchewan has severe drought as well.
Yep.
And does it go east all the way across Minnesota?
On the northern part, it does. I think if you get down to St. Cloud, north of that, anything that's under irrigation is probably okay. I think south of Interstate 94, they've caught some rains that we haven't, although they're still dry. But I don't think their crops are suffering yet to the extent that ours are. So I would say the crops we have left are soybeans, yellow corn, and black turtle beans. We don't have a crop that won't be an insurance claim.
Really? Wow. So going back to the hay a little bit, is there a target you're shooting for quality-wise right now?
Well, again, when you have stress like we do from the drought, you've got hay that's 3 inches tall, you got hay that's 20 inches tall, and anywhere in between. And of course, the quality is going to vary widely. So to answer your question, is there a quality parameter we're shooting for? We're just shooting for some hay. The quality will be what it'll be, but again, with no rain, and whether you do the foliar feeding or dry applications, we like pelletized gypsum as well for a calcium source and a sulfur source. And, if you don't get any of that to solubilize, it's not doing you any good. And again, crops, weeds, they all tend to harden off in a drought. So then you got to question, okay, we can foliar feed, but is it going to be absorbed by the plant? I mean, the plant's just in a different mode.
It's in survival mode.
Exactly. So everything changes. So again, I don't know if it really matters what your plan is when you're faced with what our plants are dealing with, because I don't think it really matters.
Now, how does insurance claims work on hay?
Well, you can do like a multi-peril thing, but the guarantees are so low. I never bothered with it. But one thing that I came across the last few years you can do is, I think it's available for forage and for like pasture. It's a rainfall policy. So then I thought, okay, well, do I want to invest the money in that? Well, if it rains, we're going to have hay. So pay the premium. If it doesn't rain, you're not going to have hay. And so it'll be interesting to see what that policy pays this year, because it's going to pay dearly. I don't think we've had 15 hundredths of rain in July.
Wow. And you were also hot, weren't you?
Very hot. Yeah. It was hot. It was warm in March, then it cooled off in April, and we had, I don't know, 8 to 10 days in May, 90 plus. And that's unheard of up in our country. And I think, I don't remember when it was, but we peaked out with an index of 105 in northern Minnesota. Very strange.
And that, coupled with the no rain, is a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. I started working ground March 18th just to keep it from blowing. I worked 1,800 acres, and I got ahead of the wind, but there was a time there it looked like a blizzard, except it was dirt.
No way.
A lot of road ditches level full like it was snow.
My goodness.
But anyway, we were able to, because I've seen this before, and it's just like, holy crap. And so I got in front of it at least, and we were able to hold the soil in place for the most part. But there's just a lot of stuff even after it was planted. I mean, the dirt's in the air, and it's just like, oh my gosh. And I've never seen a year with the amount of crappy stands and sugar beet fields. It's pretty rare to say, hey, that's a really nice field. And typically they're everywhere. So the other thing about sugar beet production, not to get off target here, but when harvest season comes, which is the first part of October, if you put dehydrated sugar beet roots in a pile, they're going to decompose. They'll never make the winter. So if I'm a sugar beet producer, I'm hoping for some moisture before the campaign begins, where you start putting these things in a pile, because if it doesn't rain, I don't know what they're going to do, because they for sure will not make the processing season, which basically runs the winter season probably through May. And it's going to be a disaster if there's no moisture in those roots.
I know this isn't exactly on topic, but sugar beets, I do want to ask a little bit about that. In the thumb of Michigan, which is a couple hours from where I live, they do a lot of sugar beets.
Yep.
But I don't really know what's happening there. And I see these giant piles of beets. That's just how they pick them, and they pile them up.
Yeah, so the way it works, and they'll put in like some culvert aeration systems. Over the years, they put up these huge sheds, and it's basically to freeze down the piles.
Oh, okay.
So the sugar beet root, when it's in a pile, it continues to respirate and it continues to give off heat because it's a living organism. So the quicker they can freeze that down and basically end that respiration process, then they will keep. But a dehydrated root is way different than one that has moisture in it. And they're going to have their hands full if we don't get some moisture.
But you have to harvest them at a certain time?
Typically, you want to get them out before the ground freezes. And so that's monitored pretty close during harvest. And harvest typically will run 2 weeks if you don't have any weather problems. But typically, if it gets down to 28 degrees at night, as you come into the plants, there's people on a stand above your truck with a machete, and they'll slice looking for ice crystals. And once the beets are froze, they'll typically shut you down. Or if it's an isolated case, they'll designate a piler where the frozen beets go, and then they'll get them processed right away because they're going to deteriorate quickly.
Once they're frozen?
Yeah. So then if it gets too cold, so a lot of these harvest campaigns run 24 hours a day. So the defoliator, which goes in front of the harvester to knock the leaves off the crown of the beet, so they'll recommend you stay right in front of your harvester because the canopy of the leaves protects the root from the frost. So that's usually pretty good. But you start getting down at 25, 26 degrees, they'll probably have to shut it down. Then depending on how cold it gets and how deep the frost penetrates the top of that root, they need to let that heal. So that could be a couple days. So once they determine they're healed, then they'll open harvest back up. On the same note, if it's too hot, they're not going to store long term if the temperature of the root's above 55 degrees. So if you have an 80-degree day, you're going to get shut down. So it's all about keeping the root temperature in a certain window. So between 55, 32, it's all good. Anything outside of that, there's a delay.
And do you determine when you're stopping or starting or waiting on hold with the weather?
Nope, that's all up to the company.
Okay, so you're raising and they come in and harvest?
No, you harvest yourself, but
Okay.
they run the harvest. So they have an agronomy staff, and they call all the shots.
Okay.
Because they know, and that's nothing you want to leave up to farmers because farmers want to go, 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 go. And if they rot in the pile, I'll worry about that later. That's not a good financial plan. So they have some agronomy people, and yeah, a lot of times the farmers are very disgusted, if not outright angry at some of the decisions they make, but it's for the long-term good of the harvest and the company. So
Now, are there a lot of organic beets in your area?
there's none. We raised beets back in '99 in my transition chemical-free just to prove we could do it. And because there was some talk originally about organic sugar beet production, but American Crystal's processing capacity is maxed out. So you either got to do it on the front end where you realize about 40% of the potential of the crop, or you wait till the very end, which could run into June if it's a big crop. Well, then how do you keep those things cool? And you got to clean down your plant, which probably takes about a week. And it just like, man, there's just no processing capacity that makes sense. So it kind of went by the wayside. So most of the organic sugar I use is cane. And I don't even know if there's beet sugar that's organic anywhere in the world.
But you raise your beets organically?
Without chemicals. We were in
Okay.
transition, so
Okay.
they weren't organic yet.
Okay, so you don't raise any beets anymore?
Nope.
Okay.
So that was the last crop I raised, and haven't raised them since because there's just no processing capacity. And like everything else, could there be processing capacity somewhere? Maybe, but the freight would kill you. So,
Yeah, I know there were some grass-fed dairy farmers, grass milk farmers, were looking to raise organic sugar beets. I thought that was in Minnesota. They were going to try some.
yep. I think Ken Larson probably fed some of that, and I know Lynn Brekke raised some organic sugar beets for that purpose. And I can't tell you today where that's at, but I don't hear a lot about it. So again, it's a lot of moisture, a lot of freight, and I think and it's all specialized equipment. So like a beet harvester, that's single use. Defoliator, single use. There's nothing else you can use them for. And what that stuff costs, I think it becomes very cost prohibitive. So, I mean, a dairyman could raise his own sugar beets and do his own thing, but you got a whole bunch of equipment that you use 10 days out of the year, maybe. So it's not very efficient use of money from a capital standpoint.
And I think it wasn't beet pulp. It wasn't. They were just using the byproduct of making.
A lot of beet pulp goes for feed for the conventional cattle market. So I think there's dry pulp, and then there's wet pulp. So a lot of the conventional cattle producers in our area kind of get hooked up with these beet plants and take that away for cattle feed. But there again, there's Roundup Ready sugar beets now. So again, that material is full of glyphosate. Glyphosate has a registered patent as an antibiotic. Antibiotics kill bacteria. What's a cow's stomach supposed to be full of? Bacteria. So a lot of people do it. I just think it's probably counterintuitive to put something like that, an antibiotic, into a cow's stomach and think miracles are going to happen. So I guess just from a philosophical standpoint, I probably wouldn't feed that to my cows if I had some.
Well, it's all about producing milk. I mean, that's the whole point that they're going for. They're not putting two and two together.
And again, livestock producers are pinched, and it's all about putting a ration together you can afford. And they make the numbers work, but it's more about a budget than the welfare of the animal. So, I mean, I understand it. I'm not going to say I'm in favor of it, but I understand it.
So on hay, and back to hay again, I just wanted to ask, we've talked about alfalfa. Is it solely alfalfa?
No. We would establish typically our alfalfa with barley or oats or another small grain and get through the first season. And then if we were going to add grass, which typically we would, but we would get a no-till drill and knife the grass in the fall. And that seemed to work much better than trying to seed it in the spring, because then your seed bed is firm. And typically, we get some fall rains, and it had the cover of the alfalfa. So I don't think there's any downside to having grass and a mix of grasses. So again, when I talk about cutting Monday and baling Wednesday, there's probably 30% grass in there. So grass does a couple things. It's going to cut your dry time. It's going to drive sugar production on your forage analysis, and it's diversity. There's just no downside. If I had to raise forage without grass, I might not raise forage.
Did you have a particular grass that you lean towards, or was that dependent on the?
That's a funny story. So started using grasses and orchard grass and tall fescue, and always striving for more. So then you're talking about these high sugar grasses and really high dollar to get the seed, very expensive. The more money I spent on grass, the worse it got. So then I was at a dairy farm one day and discussing my displeasure with my grass production in the alfalfa. And this dairyman put his arm around me and he goes, "Sonny, what grows in the ditch?" Like, oh God, Captain Obvious. I said, yeah, that's pretty good insight right there. So then we went away from all the expensive high dollar grasses to what grows in the ditch. Well, you got orchard grass, you got a fescue, and so we ended up with 3 or 4 different grasses that once you study the ditch a little bit, you kind of figure out what likes to grow there, so that's fine. But then we tried to have a mix of a cool season grass, a warm season grass. So we had some grass regardless of whatever the weather conditions were. So tried to be a little more diverse in that area. So regardless of what the weather did, we had some sort of grass production with the alfalfa. But yeah, definitely a fan of grass. And then the other thing we learned is some of these grasses would grow back very slowly or hardly at all. And so then we discovered that, well, how short are you cutting it? I'm like, I don't know, a couple, 3 inches, whatever. I said, nope, So if you got grass, your cutting height is 4 inches, no less, and it grows back readily. So if you cut grass too short, it's not going to grow back at an efficient pace that you're going to be happy with. So another pot knob on the head over the years that you learn from your mistakes. And of course, that's the nice thing about this podcast. If you listen to it, take no pleasure in watching other people repeat my mistakes. So I'm not afraid to declare them, so they have a better life.
You don't do any clovers at all?
I've thought about it, and I think that's probably a good. So the last 3 years we wrapped everything, and I never thought about it because a lot of the talk around the clovers is a lot of it in pasture. But as far as making hay, they're slower to dry down. But so then wrapping maybe takes some of that away. So I would certainly entertain adding some clovers as well. We just haven't got to that point yet. So from a diversity standpoint, and I think there's some improved varieties of clover as well now that are probably pretty good forage, where that maybe hasn't always been the case.
Mm-hmm. And I think I don't think there's a organic dairy farmer in Indiana or Ohio who doesn't know about Robin Brecken's hay and forage quality, because I know a lot of your stuff travels east.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, we ship it a long ways. So when we started, I tried to make the impression on my employees that we can't be average. And I don't think they understood that. And I said, there's average hay a lot closer to these guys than us.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care if it's a piece of twine laying in the field, a piece of plastic, just the little things. And of course, there were some days their backside hurt a little bit because they weren't exactly paying attention to details. So, but when we started loading hay out, it's like, oh, where's that load going? It's going to Indiana. Where's that load going? Pennsylvania. Where's that load going? New York. And they're like, why on earth would anybody pay to ship the hay that far? And I go, think about what you just said, because they can't get it anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's what's going to set us apart. So then the light kind of went on, and so that's when things kind of really turned the corner. Is, yeah, obviously you got to have a fertility program, and you got to have the ability to raise that kind of forage. But again, it's just the little things. You know, don't leave garbage in the field. Don't leave any cut hay in the field. I mean, if you see some, whether it's with a rake or a baler, you swing around and pick it up. I mean, don't be a slob. And I call it farming ugly. Don't farm ugly. That's unacceptable. And so again, they learn to have a pretty good level of respect for the process. And again, they'd see where these loads are going, and they just shake their heads and just like, well, I said, there's a reason.
And I mean, I want to get into the reason.
Mm-hmm.
We hear all the time, well, he's got that ground out there.
Mm-hmm.
We can't raise that kind of hay here. How much do you think that the ground that you're growing on factors in to the hay quality you're making versus just what you're doing, whether it's the process, the fertility program, the varieties of grasses and alfalfa? What are the differences that you can make?
There's no question we are blessed to live in the Red River Valley. It's extremely rich soil. It's high magnesium, and alfalfa is one of the few crops that will tolerate a high pH. It's sticky when it's wet, but it does have the ability, due to its clay content, to hold moisture. So that's definitely to our advantage. But again, I call it bitchy, if I can say that on air. It's high mag, high bicarbonate, infiltration, at least on the soil surface, isn't great. And we've been working on that. So when we started our transition, our organic matters were probably 2.2 to 2.3. Today, I'd say they're all pushing 4.5, maybe to 5. So would I have liked to speed that process up over the last 20 years? Yeah, but I think that in itself has really done wonders for our soil. And my goal before I check out is, can we get to 6? And of course, you can't do the things that conventional farms do and drive your organic matter. Matter of fact, you pretty much just erode it from the practices that they use. And, you know, I know what they do because I used to do it. And I think that's what drives them a little bit nuts, is they really have no idea what I do. And again, is it picture perfect? No. And again, from the weed side of things, and you think about the design, and you look at weeds, and most people swear at weeds, and I used to as well. But now I look at a weed and I'm like, why are you here? And that's one thing about going organic. You learn humility quickly. And so when you want to start talking to weeds and say, why are you here? It's not going to do a lot for your ego, because the reason they're there is they're trying to fix a problem. So what weeds started saying to me is, you know, I'm here because you're not a very good manager. Huh. Well, that's not an ego booster, but it's the truth. I mean, if you look at the design, and it's the same in the microbe world, okay? And I've talked about driving sugar production, and I've talked about, you know, having oxygen in the soil, and I've talked about soluble calcium and soluble phosphorus. So as far as the microbes go, it's kind of like the field of dreams. If you have the right environment, they're going to be there. Why? Because that's the design. I mean, this is designed to work. But man, in his infinite wisdom, has, through technology and breeding and manipulation of seed, and, you know, we got a better idea. Well, there appears to be some pushback to the better idea. So with all these resistant weeds and weeds that don't want to die and blah, 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 but they're there because there's been an environment created that they like. And again, how do you reverse that environment so the crops thrive and the weeds don't? And it's the same on the biology side. So again, we've kind of made a transition, and I always talk about a phrase my 6th grade art teacher said, and I never forgot it because it was so bizarre I couldn't even get my head around it. And she goes, you need to see what you're looking at. And I was just like, what on earth does that mean? And I never realized what it meant until I went organic. So I'm looking at a weed, I don't swear at it. I was like, what are you trying to teach me? So I need to see what I'm looking at to try and understand. And it's like, wow. And it's no different than there's grass in the ditch, but did I really see what I was looking at? Mm-hmm. No, but I was taught to see what I was looking at, and life got better. So again, it's just an interesting, and that's just part of the journey of learning how to navigate this thing and make an environment where crops thrive and weeds don't. And, you know, I certainly don't have that perfected at this point, but it's much better today than when I started. And so I guess in some sort of demented way, I live for the day conventional farmers come to my yard and say, you got to tell me what you're doing because it looks like you got it figured out.
And they haven't started. I mean, I'm sure you've had a few come your way already.
Yeah, there's some curiosity.
Yeah.
But again, at 55 miles an hour, it looks better than, you know, if you get your boots dirty and get out there and take a look. So, but there's a lot of 55-mile-an-hour farming in our area. So,
what do you do for weed control in row crops?
We have rotary hoe, we have a tine weeder, we have a corn burner or crop burner, and we have a lightning weed zapper. So the burner is basically for corn or bean crop before it emerges. Lightning weeder is for any weeds that get above the canopy. And I really like that tool. That's a nice tool to have. But again, if we get enough soluble calcium and enough soluble phosphorus to create the environment, the weeds are just going to go away. But in the meantime, we have these artificial means, let's say, of, you know, making it look a little prettier. But iron only deals with the symptom. Weeds are a symptom of a greater problem. Soil health or lack of soil mineralization, bad chemistry, bad biology, whatever it may be. So, and another respect, do I really mind the weeds? Well, it's not that I don't like them, but it's just a constant reminder that we're not there yet, and a constant reminder that I need to be a better manager. So, my ego's been on the shelf for a long time because we've got lots of lessons in humility. So, and the hay was a big part of driving that, and learned a lot of important lessons from having that crop in the rotation. So, again, trying to get to the problem, dealing with the symptoms, and a lot of people are caught in this just dealing with the symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Problem with that is the problem never goes away. So my goal is to get the problem to go away, and we'll see if I can achieve that before my days are done.
Well, and that's the essence of organic.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if it's plants or animals or humans.
Yep. And that's, again, 4 principles that kind of like you get all kinds of people coming to your yard. They want to sell you this, you'll sell you that. So bug in a jug today, biology, and okay, that's fine. But, and every farm's different. I mean, obviously in organic, we're all over the country, but even in the Red River Valley where I live. So if you want to talk about something, these principles have to be in play. So first is soil health, animal health, soil health, plant health, animal health, and human health. So those are all the same. I don't care where you farm. I don't care if you farm on Mars. Those are all in play. The question is, how do you achieve those things on your farm? And they could be different on every farm. But again, I think sugar production's key. How you drive that on your farm, it could be different. But again, the 2 minerals that are in play, soluble calcium and soluble phosphorus, they drive sugar production. Weeds hate them. So I think that's where you got to start if you want to start turning the corner. But then again, where can you access those? Are they affordable? And at what amount? And again, you got to spend money trying to raise a crop. Some of these things are soil amendments. Well, soil amendments don't happen unless you have luxury dollars, and that don't happen on a farm every year. So maybe that's every 3rd or 4th year. So this soil amendment and thing, it can be a slow process depending on the resources you have and the money you have to spend to achieve those things.
You'd call a soil amendment a luxury?
It's a necessity, but the dollars it takes are luxury dollars.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And again, they don't happen every year.
Well, and the reason I asked the question is because a lot of times exactly what you're saying, there isn't that spare money. And one of the first things to go out the door is the soil amendment, the spending on fertilizer or whatever it is.
Yep.
And it's probably the last thing that should go out the door because those 4 things you mentioned, they build on each other.
Yes, they do.
You don't have plant health if you don't have soil health.
And you can't skip a step.
It works backwards.
And you can't start on the top.
Exactly.
You got to start on the bottom and work your way up. And as you achieve one, the other one comes in place.
Yes.
And it's like climbing a ladder.
Mm-hmm.
You're correct.
What kind of tillage do you use for row crops? Do you moldboard plow or vertical tillage?
We don't plow. We have a ripper. So again, our soil can be very tight. So we rip it. But again, it's a temporary effect because the chemistry of our soil is such with the magnesium, it wants to come together and just cling to each other tight, which limits airspace, which limits biology. And again, you're not going to fix a chemistry problem with iron. It's not going to do it. Again, can you fix the symptom temporarily with iron? Yep. But then you got to get back to the luxury dollars for the soil amendments. And that's why we did a lot of foliar feeding, because instead of spreading 2 to 3 or 400 pounds of whatever, we can deliver a pint or a quart of whatever over the top. But again, the plant's got to have the ability to absorb that. And in the dry conditions we're in now, I don't believe that exists. So you got to have the right conditions and the right environment.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of equipment, I did want to make sure to ask to make the amount of hay that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And to wrap everything,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of equipment are you, how many balers are you running? How much hay are you cutting in a day?
We can cut, so we have 2 New Holland disc spines with 19-foot heads. And so we could cut 300 to 400 acres in a day. And so there was lots of conversation about, so do you start cutting like at 2, 3 o'clock when the sugars are the highest? And I'm like, no, we've got way too much ground to cover too fast. So again, if we start Monday, our goal is to bale Wednesday. So, and we may be cutting hay on Wednesday and baling on Wednesday. So that gets a little hairy. But so anyway, we were baling with 3 balers, New Holland, and just because we have a New Holland dealer nearby and we can get service. So I think Heston makes really good hay equipment as well. But regardless of the kind you use, you got to have service close by. I just think that's a necessity. So 2 cutters, 3 balers, 4 rakes, 2 bale wrappers. We run McHale 998 individual bale wrappers, and that's a very nice piece of equipment.
What kind of rakes do you use?
We've used citrus rakes, but I really love the rakes that Circle C makes. They're out from the West Coast, okay. But the wheel rides on a rubber stud, and the teeth that actually flip the hay never touch the ground. Mm-hmm. So when we went to that kind of rake, our ash content dropped probably by a point and a half, because we just had way less soil in the windrow. They're expensive, but again, if you're after quality, it's just a piece of the puzzle. And so very impressed. There isn't a grease zerk on them. So low maintenance, very durable. That's a kick-ass
and
rake.
It is a wheel rake.
Yep. And we had 24 wheels. It's a huge rake. And the reason we did that with a 19-foot head, so typically we would pull those 2 windrows together. And I thought, gosh, if we ever got into a light crop, those rakes are big enough to go back and grab two of those. So we could put 4 windrows together if we wanted to. Now, that would take 2 passes, but we could do that. And then, of course, if your crop's that thin, you got to rake it when it's wet or you're going to lose it all. So there's only a couple of times we really had to mess with that. And again, with the capacity these balers have, I mean, you got to put a certain amount of material in the row or you can't sit in the seat. I mean, you're trying to bale 10 miles an hour, you can't sit in the seat because it's just too rough. So it's just like any combine. I mean, the fuller you can keep them, the better they work. Balers are the same way. Mm-hmm. So that's what we had.
I'd love to come out there and ride along for a day with the haymaking process because, you know, in my area with Amish farmers, my brother-in-law mowed 40 acres one day, and that's pretty much unheard of with his 24-foot sickle bar mower. Yep. So, but I'd love to see haymaking on your scale.
Well, so people say, well, what do you do when you're putting up hay? And I said, hopefully nothing. I go, what do you mean? I said, I'm the oh shit guy. If something happens, better be there, but whatever it is, if it's an otter or whatever. And I said, so if I'm not doing anything, things are going pretty well. And I can tell you, there's nothing funner than putting up hay at that capacity when everything's working like a clock. And it's fun. It's awesome.
Especially if it's rocket fuel hay at the boot.
Yeah. So again, when you come to wrap and you can see the leaves on the end of the bale and they're just kind of hanging there like a curtain, and you just go, sweet, we nailed it. It's pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm. But you are starting to get out of hay a little bit.
Yeah, we're transitioning. And like I said, I'm 60 years old and my kids are growing up. I've got 3 daughters, 21, 16, and 12. And if there's a hope in the bunch of a farmer, it's the 12-year-old. And, everybody always says, pay attention, because someday you're going to wake up, they're going to be gone, and you're going to wonder what happened. So, again, kind of a lifestyle change, and up where we're at, I always tease my guys because it's like, you guys got to love working here. We make hay Memorial Day, July 4th, the first week in August, and Labor Day. You work every holiday there is. You got to love this. So, again, when we went to wrapping everything, the time and everything just got more efficient, more concise, and like I said, we could cut Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, bill Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. By Friday night, everything's wrapped, not picked up, but wrapped, so nothing's going to happen. It's like, see you guys, have a great weekend. And they're like, wow, this is all right. So instead of, you're not going anywhere for 14 days.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, so it was a big switch. So had a lot of acres over the years, and then started to wind that back a little bit, and kind of got right sized. And it was getting to that point. And once we got there, it was actually kind of fun putting up a hay crop.
Mm-hmm. How many acres are you raising right now?
We're down to 150 acres, and last year we had 650. And so I think, again, depending on the weather, I don't even know if we could get a piece of tillage equipment in the ground currently. But, and my wife has been pelting me with plenty of questions too about this transition. So she's like, so let me get this right. So the last few years, you really got this thing dialed in. You got it figured out. I mean, other than beating the weather, you've got this thing dialed in. Yep. And then you're going to transition out of it. You want to explain that to me? I said, it's just time. Again, 60 years old, maybe it's time to, smell the roses a little bit per se. But it's very labor intense, very capital intense, and anybody that does forage, that's no news to you. So, so I think it's more of a lifestyle change than anything going on the farm. So the part to figure out now is alfalfa set up the whole rotation.
Mm-hmm.
So now after this year, that potentially could be gone. How are we going to set up the rotation without alfalfa in it? And that's a work in progress. So I really can't tell you today how that's going to work, but it also brought small grains back into the rotation. And so again, it's, we had reinvented our farm when we transitioned to organic. We reinvented ourselves when we started raising hay. We're going to reinvent ourselves again when we're transitioning out of a hay rotation. So it's just a process that kind of never seems to end. And then again, the transition of, why are the weeds here? And can we fix the problem to the point where the symptoms all go away? So, I mean, it's just a constant evolution of learning. And that's one of the things through my transition and going organic. And it just, laying in bed one day, and I'm just like, I just about forgot how to learn. Because, I mean, when you're conventional, you go to the co-op or you have a crop consultant, do this, do that. It's like, the thought process isn't, too extravagant. And then you dive into the world of organic, where, to be honest, I didn't know a damn thing other than I wanted to leave what I was doing. Really had no idea what I was getting into. And boy, I tell you what, you get humble in a hurry, big hurry.
Mm-hmm. That was actually the question I was going to ask you was, so what's the plan for the new rotation? Because I know that alfalfa works well with corn.
Oh, man, yeah. So, again, and I think we got to get small grains back in. So this year we've got spring wheat, we've got oats, although we baled it all, soybeans, black turtle beans, and corn. And so where in there do you spot the small grains? And we're going to underseed them with red clover. Obviously, none of that grew because of the drought. And so how do you arrange those things? So which crop accentuates the next crop, and what crop does that accentuate? And try to figure out these 5 crops or any others you're going to bring to the table. So obviously, you want them to complement each other. And I can't sit here today and tell you I've got all that figured out. So that'll be a work in progress, but I just really feel that we got to bring small grains back into our rotation, underseed them with a legume so we can grow some of the fertility, kind of replace what the alfalfa used to do for us. So again, a work in progress, but I'm pretty comfortable where we're at today. And for as dry as we are, I think things look okay. But again, I don't think we have a crop that won't be an insurance claim.
Mm-hmm. Well, Robin, this was a really, really interesting conversation. It feels like once you've got this new rotation figured out, you'll probably want to move on to something different. Seems like once you've got it really dialed in, you've ready to keep moving.
And that was one of the things with the hay, and it wasn't a primary thing, but it's like for the last 3 years, and I told this to my wife, and I said, there's no challenge left there. And she goes, do you really need a challenge? And I go, well, I don't know. But this burn to achieve, or this, we kind of got there. And it's like, well, this isn't a, should never say this, but it's not a challenge anymore, because the reason for it is always a challenge. But it's kind of like we got it figured out. We got this thing dialed in, and then you're going to quit, I guess. I don't know. So I said, this is going to be a feeble attempt at a better life. So we had our hay auction, or our equipment, and she's always saying, you can't work your guys this hard. They got lives too, whatever. So they go home between 5 and 6 o'clock, and then I'm in the shop till 9, 10 o'clock at night, finally go in. And so one night she said, so this simpler way of life? I go, yeah. She goes, yeah, when's that going to start? So I probably don't have that part perfected yet by any means.
That's a work in progress.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Robin, thank you so much for taking the time and sitting down with us. This was really interesting. So glad we could do this.
Yeah, my pleasure. Appreciate it.